لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on His last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. The topic of today's khutbah is a continuation on the theme of spending in the way of Allah, which was introduced and spoken about some 3 to 4 weeks ago on 2 khutbahs successively by the regular Imam of the masjid. But for the last couple of weeks, another Imam had taken over, and the regular Imam returned and has continued on in the theme of spending in the way of Allah. And the aspect of spending in the way of Allah which he spoke about today is what is known in Islamic Arabic terminology as Waqf, and that is, we translate it usually as a trust fund, wherein certain monies have been, or certain properties have been set for a particular charitable cause, benefiting people. This may be done whilst the person is living or after their death, benefiting people, and it is classified under the general heading of the continual charity, which is or was addressed by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the well-known hadith in Sahih Muslim, in which he said that when a man dies, that his deeds are cut off except for 3. He can no longer benefit from the things of this life except for 3 things which he has done, or which is a product of his efforts. One is what is called sadaqah jariyah, or jariyah, that is continual charity whose benefit continues to benefit people. Ilmun yuntafa bi, and that is knowledge from which people benefit. And the last one is a righteous child who prays for that person. After a person's death, these things continue to benefit them. The continual benefit also includes what Prophet ﷺ referred to as the sunnah hasana, that when a person starts a good practice, he starts to do something which is good and beneficial to people in any way, that everybody who follows that particular path, the reward that they earn from following that path, a similar reward will be given to the person who started the practice. So, though there are 3 the general things which are referred to by the Prophet ﷺ, these will include this other principle, the principle of starting a good sunnah, or a good way. And this was something which the companions of the Prophet ﷺ did. The early Muslims were well known for putting aside certain wealth or property which would benefit the general people. There is a particular hadith which the Imam spoke about with regards to Umar radiallahu anhu, the second caliph, who had received what he considered to be the most valuable booty from any other battle that had taken place in, and that was from the Battle of Khaybar, I believe, if I can remember correctly. And he had asked the Prophet ﷺ what to do with it, and the Prophet ﷺ had advised him to give of it in charity. And the purpose of the Waqf, or the trust, is first and foremost to bring one closer to Allah. It is an act of worship which one does, in which one seeks to become closer to Allah, to become more beloved by Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah. And the second purpose is that of benefiting other humans. Consequently, when one considers doing or setting up a trust, one should keep in mind these two principles and choose trusts which will have the maximum benefit. They will be the best way that one can come closer to Allah, and they will benefit the most number of people. So he gave different examples, of some types of trusts that people have done, whose benefit is very small. And he recommended instead doing trusts like that of building masjids, because if a person builds a masjid, it has to be like Waqf. It is something which is not owned by anybody, although it is not uncommon in many countries that people will build masjids amongst Muslims. They will build a masjid, and this masjid will be their property, but actually this is not really a masjid in the true sense. A masjid cannot be owned by anybody. This is for Allah. So if you have property and that you want to use it for prayer, we call this a musalla, a place of prayer, but it is not really a masjid unless it is owned by God alone. It's not owned by other people. You can't do with it as you please. Because if masjid or a building which is in my name, if I change my mind next year, I want to use it for something else, I can change it. Well, this is not allowed. The masjid is a masjid. Unless it reaches a situation where there are no more people benefiting from it, people have moved away from that area or whatever, and the land may be sold, and another masjid set up someplace else where people can benefit from it. But other principles of or suggestions that he made for trust is like setting up of Quranic schools where the memorization of the Quran is taught, or the teaching of the Sunnah, of publishing books, certain books which are beneficial. And I remember particularly there's one book, Islam and Christianity. If you notice inside of it, it's written there that this is a Waqf by Begum somebody or the other, from Pakistan. Some woman had made the printing of this as a trust, and it is continually printed, every so often so many thousands of copies are printed and distributed freely. The other example that he gave, which is more common from the past, is that of the digging of wells. And of course, this may become significant in our times when we look in the areas of the Muslim world where there is the need. In places like Somalia, where people are in a very destitute situation, where there is a need for the digging of wells to provide water for the people, because the water system is broken down due to the fighting that is going on there. So to build a well there, which would be for the general benefit of the populace, this would be a very good Waqf or trust that one could do. Then he pointed out that one is not allowed to set up a trust which has in it sin. It has in it some principle or act which is disliked by Allah. For us to set up, for example, a Waqf by borrowing money from the bank, with interest, and putting our money in it on the basis that it was, say, an economic project which would eventually pay off the interest, and then it would be free to continue. See, this is involving sin. Though your intention may be very good, the fact that you are involving a sinful act of dealing in interest with it, then you're destroying the value of it. This is not an acceptable form of Waqf. Also, if one sets aside this waqf, and it is for the benefit of your children, for example, and it's possible to set aside a trust for your children, it cannot be for some children and not others. You know, like some of the children you like more than the others, so you set aside the special trust which will benefit them, and the others don't benefit from the trust. No, this is prohibited. So he quoted the verse from the Quran, which Allah said, "Inna Allah ya'mur bil adl," that Allah commands justice. And he quoted the statement of Prophet ﷺ on one occasion when one of the companions had mentioned to him that he had given something to some of his children and not given to some of the others, that he said, "Fear Allah and be just amongst your children." You know, in a general principle, it's not allowed for a Muslim, you know, to give presents to some children and not give to others. You know, there has to be justice in whatever we do. Of course, the presents that are given may not be the same. You know, you have one child who's big, who what you're buying for him something maybe more expensive than another child who's smaller. You know, that's not a problem. But the idea that you're not cutting off others while favoring some. And one is not allowed also to leave a trust when one is in a state of debt. You know, because a person might think that they may die or whatever, and they want to take out some of their money to benefit from their family, or they think to benefit themselves after their death. This is not allowed when one is in a state of debt. One must pay off one's debt before making any trust. And the trust should not block some of your inheritors from receiving your money. Like some people, you know that if you die, you've got living parents, for example. If you die, your parents will inherit some of your money. So you decide to make your money a trust for your children. And in doing so, of course, you've cut your parents off from being able to inherit from you. Such acts, again, are not permitted. And this is, of course, we're saying, this falls under the general category of making a trust which involves something which is sinful, something displeasing to Allah. Then he pointed out that the setting of a trust whilst you're living is better than doing so after you die. You know, because when you do it when you're living, because when the Prophet ﷺ, you know, had made a statement to that effect, that when he was asked that what was the best form of charity, because this trust is like a form of charity, he had said that the best form is to do so when you're healthy and fearing poverty. You see, because what the whole idea, you know, because we said that the first principle is that of getting closer to Allah, of growing spiritually. That spiritual growth involves struggle against your desire. So when you are in a state of health, you're not on the verge of dying, when you can't benefit from the money anymore, right? So you say, okay, I'll leave it for my inheritors. And you're in a state, because you're healthy, you know, you're in a state of wanting to hang on to your wealth. Because you are worried, you know, maybe the wealth goes, you will not have money next year, you can't take of certain things you want to do, etc. So you fear poverty. And when you give at that time, you see, this involves a much greater spiritual act on your part. You have to overcome your own desire to want to hold on to that wealth. And so its spiritual benefit for yourself is much greater. It's a greater act of bringing you closer to Allah. So it's better to give or set up a trust whilst you're living than after you die. No, of course, you know, if you do so after you die, there's still benefit. But we're just talking about what is better. It's important to note also that the setting up of trust is also an act of thanksgiving. You know, it is similar to the slaughtering of the animals, like on the Eid. You know, this act of taking out a portion from your wealth and benefiting others with it. This is an act of thanksgiving from the Islamic perspective. How do we give thanks to God? It's not merely by saying Alhamdulillah. Yes, this is good. We should say Alhamdulillah when good things happen to us. We thank Allah verbally. But that verbal thanks is only real if it comes from the heart. And when it comes from the heart, it is going to affect more than just the tongue. It is going to be real in your daily Islamic life. It is going to be reflected in your actions. So when you take from your wealth and you use it to benefit others, that is the best way of giving thanks, the true thanks for what Allah has given you. Because you know, you're clearly demonstrating that you know that that wealth was from Allah. It's not your own. It was from Allah as a trust. And when you use it well, you are rewarded for it. When you use it in an evil fashion, you will be punished for it. And then the Imam expressed his surprise when he hears of or he meets people who only spend their money on their families. They only spend their monies on their immediate relatives, wives, children, you know. They go for trips around the world, whatever. And they don't give any charity. They would not set aside any of their money for any charity. You know, he just said it is such a sorrowful sight. The person has really destroyed his future. That wealth, the benefit of the wealth is destroyed when he acts in this fashion. Though we are commanded to spend on our families. It's true. Prophet ﷺ had said that the best money you spend is on your family. You know? So, in other words, what he's saying is that this is first and foremost. That is, you don't spend on everybody else and you leave your family in poverty. When one of the companions came to him and said he wanted to, give away all his wealth, because he knew he was going to die, and he wanted to give away all his wealth in charity, Prophet ﷺ said no. So he said, okay, can I give away half of it? He said no. He said a third of it. He said, okay, but even a third is plenty. He discouraged them from doing that. So because it is better for you to leave your family able to take care of themselves than to die and leave them and they're begging. They have to go and beg other people. So we are obliged to spend first and foremost on our families, but the thing is that we should not be excessive. We should not only spend on our families. Of course, if one's money is only enough to spend on one family, we're not talking about such a circumstance. We're talking about a person who has enough. He spends on family, there's more left. But instead of looking at other ways and means to help others, he thinks, now how else can I spend this on my family? This is the idea. Then he quoted the verse in the Quran in which Allah had said, "O you who believe, ya alladhina amanu, أنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي يوما لا بيع فيه ولا خلة ولا شفاعة." That is, that all you who believe, that you should spend of the wealth which we have given you, is Allah speaking, before a day comes, that is the day of judgment, your death, which begins the process of your judgment, wherein there is no trade. You can no longer barter, make any kind of bartering, and there is no intercession. Nobody can come in and intercede for you on behalf of the money that you didn't spend, etc. So, use it now whilst you have the means. And then, in the second part of the khutbah, he made a comparison between what is known as wasiyah, or the bequest, and the waqf, the trust. That a wasiyah, that is when a person leaves a will, he is allowed to leave up to 1/3 of it for people who would not normally inherit from him. He cannot leave it for the people who will inherit. Only people who would not normally inherit from him. He can leave up to 1/3 of his wealth. This may even be non-Muslims. Because normally if a Muslim dies, if he has non-Muslim relatives, then they cannot inherit according to the regular inheritance division any of that wealth. If he has a son who leaves Islam, or a son who never accepted Islam, then that child is not entitled to any of his wealth. Except if he sets aside out of the 1/3 which is allowed to be given as a bequest from from that portion. He said that there is a difference between this wasiyah, where you're allowed to give this 1/3, and the waqf, in the sense that in the case of the wasiyah, which is limited to 1/3, once it has been made, you can't change it. You can't increase it, you can't vary it. Once it has been made and set, it is set. Furthermore, you're not allowed to do it if you're in a state of, you are allowed to do it even if you're in a state of debt. You can, in this case, make a wasiyah, because what happens is that when the time for division of wealth comes after your death, the debts will be paid before anything is looked at. That's the first thing that is taken care of. If the debts eat up all of your inheritance and the wasiyah, then finish. That's it. But that's the first thing that is taken care of before the wasiyah is looked at and the other form of inheritance. So, in summing up, this was a fairly short khutbah today. The Imam advises us to utilize some of our wealth. If we have surplus wealth, to utilize it in the form of trusts which would benefit people while we're living and after we die. That this is a form of thanksgiving, of showing, demonstrating our true gratitude to Allah for the blessings that He has given us. It is a means of bringing us closer to Allah, so we should do so keeping that in mind. And it's a way of benefiting people and benefiting ourselves. So again, we should also keep that in mind, that we try to make maximum benefit when we set aside our monies in this fashion. If there were any points from the khutbah which I missed, that we'd like to add, those who followed the khutbah in Arabic. If there are any comments anybody would like to make or questions?
You mentioned having a child that's not Muslim. So you have two children, one is Muslim and one is not Muslim. And this is a reference to giving them gifts. If you give a gift to encourage someone who is Muslim to continue to be Muslim, do you still have to give a gift to the one who is not?
Well, in this case, because the non-Muslim child really has no right, beyond what you choose charitably to do, it would not be a requirement on you. If that child has chosen this belief, it's not a requirement on you now to spend of your wealth on that child. If you chose to do so, for the purpose of trying to bring that person closer to Islam, you see that that might benefit them, then it's for you to do so.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know how you give gifts in general. You have 4 or 5 gifts, and then one is you require for all of them that you look for.
Yes.
The other one is requirement.
No, it's not there. But again, yeah, it would be good, if you see that it is going to be of benefit. But if you have a child, for example, who is stubborn, it's just really is not responding in any way towards coming to Islam, you see, then why waste it? Better to go and give it to a Muslim who is not related to you. They have more right on your money than that child.
The establishment of Waqf, for example, a masjid. Is this permissible to name the masjid after the person? For example, masjid or
Our brother's question concerning naming, if a person establishes a trust, like a mosque, is it allowable to name it after a particular person? There's nothing which prevents it. The only case which would be not permissible is if one named the mosque after a disbeliever, for example. Like for us in America to name a mosque, Elijah Muhammad or Clara Muhammad or something like this. actually, brother.
In the case of mechanic what to do in children, is there an age by which we consider that child is capable of making his own choices in regards to religion and other affairs of the world and the hereafter?
Once the child reaches puberty, this is the age of what is called taklif, the age at which the child now is held to account by Allah. Once the child has reached puberty, this is the beginnings of maturity. He now has the capability of making a reasoned choice. He now becomes responsible. It's from that point, around 15 years old, something like this, 15 plus.
So until then, do we have a label on a child saying he's a Muslim, he's not a Muslim?
Normally speaking, if it is a child from your family, I mean you would assume the child is Muslim if the child is doing the Islamic practices. But what we were talking about, our circumstance, for example, some of us before Islam, we had married, for example, and divorced, and after a person has accepted Islam, maybe the mother of your child has not accepted Islam, and she has been raising the child now as a Catholic. You cannot now say, well, this child is a Muslim because he's my child. For all intents and purposes, that child is a Catholic, a Christian. When he reaches the age of maturity, then he has to make a decision. You have to try to influence the child, of course, to try to give the child as much information as you can so that he can make a correct choice. You follow the circumstance? But under normal circumstances, you and your wife, you're both Muslims, the child is born, the child is considered Muslim, growing up in your family with him. This is sort of general consideration. Brother?
Here in the Islamic countries, might not be powerful, but it's not so. As some important as this, building countries like India or like America, we have to own that power, right? What is your point of view?
Well, the setting up of trust, our brother's questions are concerning the idea of a mosque not being owned by any individual. As you said, in Muslim countries, it's easy enough because it's a principle recognized according to Islamic law that this can take place, and so there's not any problem. Even the Muslim countries that are ruled by a non-Muslim, still they recognize certain aspects of Islamic law, so these are allowed, no problem. However, in countries of the West, say in America or Philippines, Europe, where they have strict laws concerning ownership of property, he questioned in such circumstances where they would or may require you to actually own it, what would you do in this case? As I would say that in these countries they do have a principle of trust. In the West, in America, in Philippines, they do have principles of trust, where trusts are set up. They do. And the trust is set up according to certain principles. It's not owned by any particular individual. It's defined legally. This can be set up. The laws of the West do not prevent the setting up of trust. They may have some kind of stipulations that normally are not required in Muslim countries, but in general, West. Our brother's question concerning institutions which are income generating, could these be considered, or could the Waqf be in this category? This is really what you're asking, I think. Yes, Waqf, this is very good to have a Waqf which generates income from which people will benefit, which will keep the thing that you have set aside going. For example, you may build a school, and connected to the school you build some shops. The shops are rented, the money from the shops help to maintain the school. This is perfectly valid, and It is highly recommended, especially in countries where Muslims are in a minority and they need these kind of projects which will be income generating as opposed to trying to maintain them through charity, the collection of donations and charity.
You mentioned albums that is beneficial. Say you publish books and they're good books and people benefit from it. But you thought it would be to do it to earn something also. You die and your inheritors continue benefiting from the sales of the books, but the books themselves have information that is very useful. And the reward still.
A brother's question concerning the second of the categories that the Prophet ﷺ spoke of, wherein a person may continue to receive benefit after his death. That is, ilmun yuntafa bi. That is, knowledge which people benefit from. If a person has written a book with the idea of benefiting people, but also with the idea of making money, the economic project, to earn some income, publishes a book. So that book serves a dual purpose. When the book is sold, he earns money from it, and at the same time, the knowledge in it is benefiting people. Now, when that person dies, the book continues to be sold. His children may reap the economic benefits from it. Does he also gain from the knowledge which people continue to benefit from the books? Or is it reduced by the fact that he's making money from it? No. The principle is that as long as people are benefiting from the knowledge, then you will benefit from it also. As long as you have done it, with the intention of pleasing Allah. I mean, intention of pleasing Allah doesn't mean that you cannot also have an economic factor that you benefit from it also. But it's just that your intention should be that of pleasing Allah. Because if your intention, for example, was fame, you're writing a book because, for you to get a bestseller would mean your name is in lights, everybody knows you, you're famous. I mean, this was your intent. People may benefit from the knowledge in the book, but you won't benefit from it because your intent was corrupt. Can property which has been set aside as waqf be rented to non-Muslims? Yes. However, if there are Muslims who have need for it, they should be given preference. But if there aren't any, then to rent it to non-Muslims so that the income can benefit. Of course, if it's a non-Muslim who is setting up a cigarette shop, selling alcohol, of course then we can't rent it to him. We can only rent it to him to use it in a fashion which is Islamically allowable.
If you have property which is next to a mosque, which is the famous mosque, and you are renting it on so many thousands per month or per year, and you have non-Muslims who can't afford the rent, but who need the property, and you have a group of non-Muslims who can afford the rent, who want the property. What would be the best choice?
Well, you said non-Muslims in both cases, so you
Muslims who want the property but they can't afford the rent. Whereas you have non-Muslims who can afford the rent but who also want the property. What do you do as the person in charge of the property?
The brother has created a scenario for us here now. If a person if there is a masjid and there is adjoining property which is in trust as a means of generating income for the maintenance of the mosque, etc. And there are some Muslims who need this property to live on, for example, but they don't have money to pay for it. But there are non-Muslims who are willing to rent it and pay. What would you do at that juncture? The principle is that if that land had been set aside as a means of generating income to maintain the mosque, then that should be what it is used for. You cannot then now give away that land and say, okay, I'm going to give it away to some Muslims. No. So in this case, where the non-Muslims, better let the non-Muslims come earn income from the land, and you use some of that income to benefit or to help if in the way in which the trust was set up that it's possible that the income coming from it can be used for more than the mosque, then better to have used that additional income to help those people who are in need. But the rules concerning the trust, they're sort of quite rigid, that you really don't have the freedom to modify it, as one may choose, Up to you.
If a woman has a debt, when she gets married, does the husband inherit the debt?
If a woman has a debt and she gets married, does the husband become responsible for her debt? No. Her debt is her debt, as her money is her money. If he chooses to take responsibility, he can do so. If she makes it a condition in her marriage, then he is obliged. But if she just comes and after they've been married for so many years, she informs him, well, listen, I have this big, huge debt from the old days or whatever, this is your responsibility. No, it's not his responsibility.
I have a question about is there any difference of inheritance between Hanafi or Shafi or Hanbali or something? Or all have the same inheritance?
Okay, our brother's questions concerning the inheritance laws as they're applied in the various schools of Islamic law. The basic divisions, there is no difference at all, because there are some things which have been clearly defined in the Quran. Then there are other things which have been defined in the Sunnah authentically, and these things basically there are no difference about. However, there are certain other far relatives and certain other circumstances which arose after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Sahaba, the companions themselves, differed as to how to handle it. And in the differences or the different opinions that they put forward, you find some of the schools taking different rulings accordingly. So there are some differences in the very minor issues which come on sort of rare occasions, but the main general distribution, father, mother, uncle, brother, sister, these, it's all the same.
Are adopted children eligible for inheritance?
Question, are adopted children eligible to inherit like children of your own blood? No. In the case of adopted children, this is when if you want to leave for them, you have to use the wasiyah, the bequest. You can give them up to 1/3 of your wealth. For example, normally speaking, if you died and only left a son behind, right? He will automatically have access to 1/2 of the wealth of their parents, But if you had, for example, a son by adoption, the maximum that you could give him in bequest is 1/3. So he will not fall under those laws. Or the son, if there are no parents, he can take all of the wealth. There are no other, inheriting relatives, and the son is there, he will take all of the wealth. But if you had left an adopted son, the most that he could take is 1/3. If you wrote it as a wasiyah. If you didn't write anything, then he's not entitled to anything. It will go to the state. Yes. Wasiyah, or if it is said in front of witnesses, where we have people can confirm that this in fact has been made. Yeah. Any other questions?
Both parents are Christian. What child the parents, they divide their wealth, favoring some of the Christian parents. They don't give share to this Muslim child. Muslim child should demand for his share.
If parents are non-Muslims and they die, this is when the picture I think is most clear. When they die, they leave behind a will in which they have given wealth to all of their children except for the Muslim child. Now, in non-Muslim societies in the West or East, you'll find cases where a will may have been left behind, but because there is grave injustice in it, it is possible for some people who are relatives to question that will and demand, another division of the wealth. And sometimes the government may agree, and they will divide it up in accordance with the general inheritance laws that they function by. As a Muslim, you are not allowed to inherit in this fashion. So you could never contest the will. Yeah, that's amongst themselves. So Muslims, because Prophet ﷺ said, the Muslim does not inherit from the kafir, the disbeliever, nor does the kafir, the disbeliever, inherit from the Muslim. This is according to the normal inheritance laws. But this does not include a will. If non-Muslim parents leave a will, they write a will and say, I want to give so much of my wealth to my Muslim child, that is, it's allowable for you to take this. And similarly, you are allowed to write a will. This is the bequest in which you give something to one of your non-Muslim relatives who say, for example, is very kind, looking after your children in your absence. You came over here to work, you have a non-Muslim sister who's looking after your children. She's done good. For you to do back good to her, of course, Islamically, it is recommended. It's good.
Does Islam allow adoption?
Does Islam allow adoption? If adoption means that the child's name is changed and your name is put on the end, this is not allowed. But to raise a child in your family, looking after that child as if he were your own child, this is something recommended. But the idea of changing the name, because this is what becomes now a principle of adoption in non-Muslim societies, that the child becomes literally your child, has all the rights of your blood children to inherit and everything else. And for example, that child, would not marry your daughter, who is by blood. No, in Islamic law this is not the case. I mean, that adopted person that you brought in family can marry your daughter. It is not, because the adoption does not bring the person within your family tree. This is somebody who you are being charitable towards, you're looking after. That's as far as it goes.
There's also the aspect of calling the child your son or daughter. They consider you mother and father. They totally know that you're not their biological but they will have to assume that is indeed their parent.
This is a good point. That in the case where you have brought somebody into the family, from the Islamic perspective, you do not give that child the impression that they are in fact your child. In the West, if you've adopted a child very small, you will raise them, and the child will never know. Maybe out of anger one day you might say something, but otherwise, normally people just keep this hidden from the children. This is wrong, Islamically. No, it's not allowed to do this. You raise the child should know that you are not his parent. I mean, you treat them very nicely, etc., but the child has a right to know who his own parents are and, what his background was, etc. When he comes of age and he wants to know these things, you inform them. You don't keep these things hidden from them.
What is the recommendation regards to ownership, joint ownership of property between a husband and a wife? The way it's common to have different ownership.
Well, it is possible for a husband to put his wife's name on the property, that it is 50-50 owned by them. In other words, what he's doing, he's giving away, whilst he's living, half of the value of his property to his wife. He may do this. However, this is commonly done in the West. However, really, the normal practice in Islam is that his wealth is his wealth. She has a right from it, which Allah has defined. When he dies, she gets it. If she has put equally in economically to getting this particular property, then she has equal rights in that sense. But a situation where, like in the West, if you divorce a woman, all of a sudden the courts now come and divide up everything you have 50-50, and they're giving the woman, maybe even 60-40 or whatever else. Of course, Islamically, especially if you're living in Western circumstances or any other country where they'll do this kind of thing, it's very important for you not to do that. Because this woman may demand her rights according to the law, which may be contrary to Islamic. Right? You just keep it in your name. Yes.
Even back when the court doesn't make you do that at the time of divorce, the court can force you.
No, in the case of the payment of alimony and these type of things, the only way that you could avoid that would be to have your wealth secret.
But especially they only, first of all, they go out of the house anyway at the time of divorce. And if you happen to carry only one house, they only have to just go for the house because I'm housewife or a woman who was just working. And naturally you cannot pay the money. So they say, okay, I have to have a house and right to it. So normally they just go out of the house and they say, okay, you just go and rent it out yourself and this will be her property. And how can you fight it off with the court? So you cannot bring the Islamic laws over there anyway because the laws of the land is quite in that position.
Right. In the case where you have property which is even your own, in the case of divorce in the West, the government does step in. The only way you can avoid that is by having other property. Your property is not under your name, or it is hidden property, value wealth. This is the only way you can avoid that. But what I was saying was, in terms of a person who, for example, is married and he puts his wife's name on the property, then that gives her much more access. If she decides, for example, she wants to sell, they're not even divorced, she decides she wants to sell, she may now have abilities to put that person in debt or whatever, which Islamically it is not really would not be for the benefit of the family, and may deprive the children ultimately from their rights, by way of inheritance. Any other questions? Oh. Last question? Okay.
Just wondering, practice people when making salah, after making their required salah, or making sunnah salah in a different place. They move to another part of the national mosque. Is that an authentic process?
Okay, question of our brother. We commonly see people after making the compulsory prayers, and they're going to make voluntary prayers, they shift their place. They will go forward, sideways, backwards, or something, Is this an authentic practice? Or is it something recommended? Should we be doing this? This is based on a hadith found in Abu Dawood. However, this hadith is not authentic, in which the Prophet ﷺ had said that if you are going to make another prayer, that you should either move forward or move to the side, something like this. But this is not authentic. It is perfectly okay for you to pray in the same spot. Some people have gone to give certain other rationales that, when you go and pray in another spot, every place that you make sujood, will give witness for you on the day of judgment. So the more places you can make sujood on, the more witnesses. Well, no. If you make sujood on this place twice, then it gives twice the witness. Finish. So there's really not really a logical argument in that sense. But if you wish to do so, it's no harm, as long as you're not thinking that this is in fact sunnah, and then you go and tell other people that really you should do that, brother, please move another place. Or you'll see sometimes it becomes a problem, because you get up, you want to pray the same place, somebody's trying to move you out and trying to shift you because he wants to take this spot. No, see, this is when it has gone overboard, and in ignorance, and it ends up becoming, you could say in a form of bid'ah, because it's not authentic practice, and it is now affecting others.
I remember reading somewhere saying this point. I think it's hadith. but I'm not sure. I said that the routine of Muhammad was that when he prayed Salah, he would sit for a while and wait to sit, or he would move to another place, because he didn't want the Sahaba to think, or the people to think this is a continuation of the prayer, of praying in the same place. Probably you just finished Zuhr. He wouldn't then stand and play Sunnah, but you might misunderstand. I think this is an extra part of Zuhr, for example.
No, what you've added something to it, which is not quite what it said, okay? The practice of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as the brother related, was that when he finished making a compulsory prayer, you know, he would either sit for a while and make tasbih, and then he would get up to pray, or he would move to another place, so as not to give the people, or to give the impression that this was a part of the same prayer. Truly, he did tell us that if we complete the prayer, that we should pause, we should make a tasbih. We should not just get up as if we are continuing the same prayer. But when he moved, he would move and leave. Not that he moved to another place to make prayer in another place. So he used to, after compulsory prayers, because most often the voluntary prayers that he made were done in his home. So when he finished his prayer, he would get up and leave, just go to his home and pray the voluntary prayers there. Not that he shifted to another place and made another prayer in another place. This is not in the narration. Okay, inshallah we'll close. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. We ask Allah to help us to realize the responsibilities that we have in our wealth, to share of this wealth with those who are in need, to utilize the wealth in a way which will benefit us whilst we have the opportunity to do so, whilst we are living and healthy. Amen.